What happens when Mars, the god of war, personal will, and action, aggression, masculine energy, what happens when that energy goes retrograde in the sign of Gemini, which is the sign of the twins, the sign of duality, the sign of opposites, the sign of yin and yang? Furthermore, what happens when Mars is retrograde in Gemini and there is a full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus? All up in the mix of the retrograde itself. What does the current astrology that we're living in right now say about what will karmically happen next? What's coming up? What's in the grid? How does astrology show us what's coming up and what's in the grid of life, of co-creation? Now, and this is probably perhaps the most important piece, with all that is going on in your life, in my life, in our world right now, how can you personally empower yourself in all of that? And most notably, in this current cycle of Mars retrograde in Gemini. Yeah, this started October 30th. It's going to go until January 12th, sort of, because there's an integration phase that takes us even further out than January 12th. But here's what's up. This is truly the most important cycle of 2022. When I was looking ahead at all the cycles, back in December 2021, when I do my annual forecasts, this was the cycle that I knew would be the one to watch out for, because this is the cycle, this Mars retrograde in Gemini that we're currently in, that would bring the whole entire karmic momentum, not of just 2022, but 2021, 2020. Actually, we could go back about 3 decades, no lie. But that this cycle would bring us here right now. Now, if you want to know, hey, how do I get through this, Ohado? How do I navigate this as an empowered co-creator? How do I meet these energies with conscious choice, with mystical pivots, with grace? Well, you're going to want to stay tuned to this Friday Social Live, because I'm going to give you the best guide out there, I promise. And I'm going to tell you all about this upcoming full moon lunar eclipse and go deep into some of the most important dates of this current Mars retrograde in Gemini. In fact, this is really about what do we do when the dualism of life, the polarities of life go dark. Stay tuned. So, are you suffering from the Mars retrograde blues? Do you have some sense of what that even is? I'm going to guide you through a little bit of a personal evaluation regarding this particular Mars retrograde in Gemini, which started, as I mentioned earlier, on October 30th. Will go all the way until January 12th. And there's a lot going on in between, not just the retrograde itself with Mars retrograde, which happens roughly every year and a half or so. But there are so many, true to Mars, trigger points, tipping points. And if you take a step back and just consider all that I have been teaching, I'd say on these Friday Social Lives for the past couple months anyway, certainly the last few, we've talked about karma. I did a Friday Social Live on, does what goes around really come around? How can we look at karma differently? So hold that thought. And then I also talked about something like the overgiver. Why do overgivers never receive? What is that about? Which does deal with Mars, and you have to wait for it, but track with me. Now, when you pull all this together, it kind of makes sense that, because this is what I always say, astrology is what we live. And I'm always picking topics that are, generally speaking, very relative to what we're living. What I'm picking up in the field and talking about those topics, and it all pulls together in tonight's Friday Social Live. So, going back now to this question, are you suffering from the Mars retrograde blues? And how would you even know if you were? Well, I'm going to guide you through a little evaluation because we do want to look at what does happen in the psychic field, in your psyche, in my psyche, when Mars indeed seems to station in the sky and then go backward. It's called retrograde. Now, is it really going backward? No, it's a sort of optical illusion. All retrogrades are, but because we're working with astrology, which is a tool of synchronicity, then that retrograde, that going backward means something. And in my journey with astrology, which is going on 40 years now, I fell in love with it because it was so empirically accurate. When a cycle was, if you looked up in your astrology books or looked up in your what's called an ephemeris, if you know this, if you're an astrologer, you know what that word means. You start to track cycles and then watch life, your psyche, your interior, the exterior, all of it. And it blew me away that in doing so, I would see with such accuracy, things happen just in alignment with these transits, with these schedules, with these things that were going on. So here we are, Mars retrograde in Gemini, and we want to know, hey, yeah, what's going on here? Where's this headed? What are some of the events packed into, karmic events packed into this cycle? And if we're talking about Gemini, it's in Gemini, what does that mean? And we were talking about, I guess one could say the twins, right? You probably relate to the sign the twins. That's the archetypal motif that most of us see Gemini through, which makes sense, and I'm going to explain why. But what is Mars exactly? I mean, do you really know? Do you know what Mars is inside of you? Do you know what Mars is not only as an archetype or a pattern, but as a force inside your own psyche? But let's go out as a force in culture, as a force in society. Because it's important to remember that every culture, every society, every group has its own psyche. So then every society, every group has its own Mars. Now I'm going to guide you into yourself as a solar system in a minute, but I want to just start opening up the doors here of how I want to pull in guidance and map the cycle. Now, you may have heard, I'm sure by now, other astrologers out there that talk about cycles, and I want to differentiate and just be clear on the way I'm going to work with this. I don't look at planets, and it's going to sound like I do, but I don't. I don't look at planets as causing anything. I look at them as, Carl Jung would say, as an acausal synchronistic principle. What's happening out there is happening in here. What's happening out there also is embedded in this matrix of life, this holographic matrix, spherical matrix of life that we live in here on this planet called Earth. And on this planet, we live in patterns. And those patterns are connected to cycles of time. And those cycles of time are archetypal, which means they carry a certain energy. They carry a certain force and pattern in the cycle. And that is what astrology shows. So I call my working with astrology holocompass astrology. It's based on Western astrology and a lot of what is out there in terms of what you may know about astrology. But I'm going to ask you, just to receive the best benefit of what I'm going to map out here, to let all that go and come in with a beginner's mind. Now, if you're already familiar with the way I work with astrology, you know what's up. But if you're new to me, I want you to just kind of go, okay, maybe you don't even believe in astrology. And I don't care if you believe in astrology or don't, because I will tell you this, I don't believe in astrology either. I experience astrology as real. I don't believe in it. I experience it as a real process, phenomena, and therefore the tool of astrology as a real tool. It's not about belief. Do you believe in gravity or do you experience gravity? Same thing. Now, one of the questions out of the gate that you might ask is, well, Robert, I'm not a Gemini. Should I care? Absolutely, you should care. Because what I will tell you is that every sign in astrology, there's 12, right? Let's just take a little look at them real quick. All 12 of these signs, they exist in all of us. So I don't look at it as if, well, you don't have Gemini in your chart or you don't have Gemini as a sun sign, so don't worry about it. If we're going to talk about mystical truth where everything's interconnected and all is one, then that means all of this is sort of connected together. And by the time I'm done, you're going to go, yeah, sure is. I'm not a Gemini, but it's like he was just reading me. Yeah. So you have Gemini in your psyche because it's a step, a process, a phase of psychological, psychospiritual, and mystical development for all human beings. Now, let me just pull a few threads and make my point. You talk, right? You communicate, right? You think with your mind, right? You learn, right? You know the names of things, correct? You speak a certain language, correct? That is Gemini, all of it, and more. So to say that, well, I don't have Gemini in me, is to say, well, I don't speak, I don't communicate, I don't talk, I don't think, I don't read, I don't learn, I don't perceive the world through something we're going to go into, dualism, duality. Yeah, you do. We all do. So track with me and stay in the zone of this matters. Now, I will also qualify that and say, look, if you do have a birth chart that you know your own birth time, birthplace, etc., and you've cast that and you know you have Gemini somewhere in your chart, well, that definitely is emphasized and matters. And then you interpret that with either through a real expert archetypal or intuitive astrologer, or you maybe know yourself how to kind of look at that. Absolutely. So while it's a both and, well, I'm going to say we all have Gemini, we all should care. Certain people amongst us are going to experience this more intensely and be triggered or pressured in certain ways that others may not. But by the time I'm done going through this, you're going to be like, that's all of us. Because we're dealing with the collective. This is what I love about astrology. It's why I love this tool and why I was so drawn to it, because it can speak to the collective and individual at the same time. It is a holographic tool. It's like if I see what's ever in you, it's in the whole hologram of life. And vice versa. If something is happening in the hologram of life, it's happening somewhere in you too, both and. Both and's actually a Gemini concept, as is either or. So we got some ground to cover there. Now, you got the Mars retrograde blues. How would you know? Well, have you been struggling? And I'm going to mention this date, and I'm going to tell you why, but just hang with me and just follow my guidance. Have you been struggling since September 3rd with power and powerlessness issues? Feeling powerless and wondering, do I even have power? Does what I do even matter? Have you been feeling like you just want to take off and fly and get out of here, but you're weighted down by your old self-sabotage? Has that been happening since September 3rd in a more amped up and focused way? Have you had a lot of feelings of blocked will? Like you're trying to do something and it's just like every freaking thing keeps getting in the way or sabotaging you, and not necessarily, things you even planned for, like your internet going out. This happened to me. Or just something that makes it feel like it's doubly hard just to get through a day because there's so many obstacles on the path of the day that by the time you even get through the first few, you're like, really? It's only noon. Sound familiar? How about courses of action just totally being shut down? Like, do not pass go. You cannot go. What about feeling just generally a sense of confusion in your direction, life direction, feeling scattered, a lot of scattered energy, and asking questions like, what do I do now? Where do I go now? Maybe there's been some events in your life recently that have happened that have recalibrated reality, and you're like, I don't even know where to start putting these pieces back together. Or do you just feel a certain exhaustion and fatigue and psychic, physical, and emotional or psychological soul level of tiredness? Like, I am done, dude. I'm so tired. Well, these are the Mars retrograde blues. Now, a couple other pieces of the Mars retrograde blues could be a lot of latent anger or rage suddenly coming out, and you're like, where'd that come from? Why am I that angry? What's going on? Or getting sick, like physically your immune system's like, and you get a virus or something. And sometimes, during Mars retrogrades, it can be an illness like a virus that just you cannot kick. It just drags on and on and on. Do you also find that maybe since September 3rd of 2022, there's a lot of, let's say, past karma catching up to you? And if you got honest, you'd be like, I could sit here and play victim, but I set that in motion. I made that choice that led to this event or this karmic result or this karmic, cycling back to me. Or do you just feel this? And I've seen this a lot. I couldn't care less. Ohado, great. Mars retrograde blues, whatever. I'm apathetic, bordering on depressed. And why should I care? Now, if any of that resonates, you're in the right place. And I'm going to go into the energetics of what's happening in you and in the world as to why a lot of us, throw me in the mix, I think I could have checked off about all 10 of those. All of us are feeling this to some degree, near as I can tell. Now, tracking back here over 2022, let's start here, because here's the thing. This Mars retrograde in Gemini right now, what we're experiencing, where it's headed, the events in it ahead, they didn't just happen out of nowhere. Astrology cycles don't work that way any more than our aging does, our maturity does. So as we mature, well, that's based on what? The cycles of life we've lived before when we weren't as mature. And we just start to get more wise, hopefully, or more adept, or more skilled, or whatever it is, more able to look at life through its complexities. We become more sophisticated. Well, astrology cycles, similarly, are about a continuum and a process in motion. So I can't talk about Mars retrograde without including, one, the other cycles right now, because all of this is a big conversation and story. Now, we could say it's a big conversation and story happening in the sky. Okay, that's what we do as astrologers. But it's rather the conversation and story we're living collectively and individually. One could think of it as the planets representing characters in a story, or evolutionary pressures, and the thread of destiny in all of that. That is, yes, perhaps more like a story. So I'm gonna approach the guidance from this level, that Mars retrograde in Gemini is what we're living now, and its expression, manifestation, karmic momentum, everything ahead is based in where we've been. And when you think of it this way, this is when you get spherical in your perspective, meaning everything's interconnected. So, wow, where have we been? Where have we been in 2022? Let's just start there. What big things have happened in the world, in your life, in your country? What things are on the move? Now, I'm going to distill this down into a focus of Gemini and Mars. But I want you to understand that this is how all astrology works. I could be talking in a few years, whenever Mars would go retrograde in Gemini again, and bring up a whole different set of things based on the dynamics of that moment or that cycle of time that were relative and contextual to that cycle of time. So a lot of times, unfortunately, astrology is approached from this generic kind of cookie cutter this point of view where that treats astrology as if it's not alive. We're not evolving. Life isn't alive. This whole solar system that we live in is a living energy pattern itself. So we have to talk then as if this is life, y'all. Now, what's fascinating, powerful, and amazing about using astrology to look at life is we get to see the archetypes that are active, the patterns in motion in us personally and in the collective. This is about what you live, being alive in it, and astrology lets us see the patterns as they unfold through cycles of time. And each pattern is karma. What is karma? Well, for now, I'm going to say it's the energetics of all the choices, actions, and even more than that, things we've said, beliefs we harbor, ways we've adopted perception. That all produces karma. And when you have a retrograde cycle of any kind, certainly, and most notably perhaps, Mercury retrogrades, Mars retrograde here, it's a shadow process that's starting to happen in relationship to the karma in the grid of life. Now, I got to bring in the main driver of all of this, of all of life. The main central force of astrology as a model, and that is holism. Holism. So you could maybe look at, any astrological guidance or any astrological forecast or any astrological information and go, well, what's driving all that? Like, okay, Robert, you're going to talk about Mars retrograde in Gemini being a dark night of our dualism. And for what? What's the gravitational force, if you will, or the fuel of the shadow process, the dark night process of the dualism of our lives going through a dark night? Why? What is it? Like, what's the driver? I'm going to say it's holism. It is this principle. Now we're in mystical territory, but all of life is part of this. It's this principle that we're all interconnected. It's all one whole. And holism is a force that seeks its kind of continual learning, expansion, but connection. So when we have a Mars retrograde in Gemini, it's about, hey, humanity, you, me, we're starting to go off a little bit outside of what holism is as a law of life, as a mystical law, as a truth. And the retrograde says, get back here. Let's course correct some of that. Get everyone reconnected in greater truth. What truth? Well, the truth that we're all interconnected. And therefore, on the spiritual journey of co-creation, we need to honor all as one by making decisions, taking actions that do that. So if I am moved to choose or take action in life from the energy of hate, well, that's not something that honors holism. Quite the opposite. It makes someone the other. And then now I'm in shadow Gemini polarity. So one thread here, but just to teach you, hey, this is all about how we all interbe. This is a law that exists, whether you believe it or not. Once again, this isn't about belief. This is what's just true. At every level, we all are interconnected. We all affect each other. And that isn't just human beings. That is how we affect the biosphere, animals, the oceans, the sky. This is about, hey, we all are on this journey with soul contracts, soul agreements to keep learning co-creation. And co-creation, because we do have free will, lets us choose if we have a conscious awareness enough to choose, because a lot of times we're not even consciously choosing, and there is no free will. It's our culture choosing for us. It's our family choosing for us. It's our shame choosing for us. But let's say we free up a little free will. Well, now your angels look at you and go, what do you choose? Do you choose to act as if you're the answer to someone's prayer? Or do you choose to act as if you are someone's nightmare? Which is, what are we doing here? Are you going to make choices that honor your interconnectedness to everyone else and the mutual equality we all share? We all are enough. We all have the same value. Or will you make decisions offer judgments, offer, and this is a part of the Gemini theme, words that do not honor, hey, we all matter. So this is really about where we are in this bigger meta view of astrology, which is shifting from one age of Pisces, to a new age of Aquarius, which is about a dominant new pattern rising up in society and culture and the world that sort of contains co-creation. It's not the only pattern. All the patterns are here, as represented through astrology signs. It's just the one that's ascended into dominance, and that is now becoming Aquarius, which is very evident by these things like the internet being a new part of our reality and having to negotiate the growing pains of that. The internet can be a tool of great connection, teaching, here we are, or division, and inciting violence or hate, which we know now too. So now, in this continuum of life and cycles, what's been happening in our world the past few years, I could go back about a few decades, frankly, and say that there's karma in this cycle of Mars retrograde in Gemini that was decades in the making. And it is now coming to fruition, not as punishment. Remember, karma isn't punishment. We talked about that, right? But as something to learn from or not. Something to evolve within or not. So this is where we start to step into our own holism and look at what is Mars in us and in the world. Now, Mars is an archetype to me. It's, born out of Ares, which the Greeks called this force Ares, the Romans imported. And remembering the Greeks amalgamated many mythologies into Ares, from Mesopotamia, the Babylonians, I could go on and on. But what each culture, no matter who called it what, identified about us and about life is that there is an active masculine creative principle that exists in the human psyche, you, me, and as functions really as an ambassador or agent for the human will and ego in you and me, but also it's just a principle of life. So the Romans gave this energy the name Mars, and we have associated Mars with god of war, aggression, masculine kind of ideas, which is not necessarily inappropriate, but it's also a little myopic. Because within Mars exists also Eros, which is like the love glue of the universe. So if we go to war and we are going because we're fighting for something we love, like our country, well, Eros, passion, that deeper love is what drives it. Now, if we aren't connected to Eros with Mars, well, that's a different story. And now in the world, we see both. We see a war between Russia and Ukraine, in which the Ukrainians are connected to Eros in the fight, and the Russians are not. Let me say it another way. The Ukrainians are connected to holism, the holism of their own identity as a country, but the Russians aren't. So much so that when there's a version of their draft going on for the war, the men are fleeing for the borders because their heart, their Eros, isn't in this war. So there's a deeper spiritual tether to Mars that our culture, and we're going to cover this a little, has in various ways stripped out. And in spirituality self-help circles, Mars becomes, frankly, often shamed. You're not supposed to be aggressive. You're not supposed to draw a sword. You're not supposed to fight. Peace is the only solution. That's spiritual. And I disagree. And I think thinking that isn't useful. I mean, would peace be a great solution? Totally. I'm not saying that it isn't, but sometimes in the grid and laws of life here, you have to fight. But what drives that is what matters. Are you driven to fight? Because you can be just as driven by hate to fight as you can be by love. The fuel between the warrior in each fight is what's going to determine the karma of that fight. So hold that thought. Now, I just want to get you familiar with Mars. What's Mars in you? I want you to consider yourself a solar system, because you are. You are your own little solar system in a bigger solar system. Now, your sun sign in astrology, is the core coordinating pattern of your destiny. Let me say that again and add in a little more. The sun, your sun sign, is your core creating pattern of destiny and is not necessarily what you innately are at all. So when you go to sun sign astrology books and they say this is what you are because you're a sun in Capricorn, ambitious, driven, mountain climber. You're like a little goat that just keeps going and gets back up. You are resilient. You are a survivor. You have the survivor archetype, and you're looking at that description going, I don't relate to any of that. But my sun is in Capricorn. I would go, yeah, that's what you're born to become more like. That's what development and destiny are about. Destiny is developmental. It's not innately what you are. Your soul's on this journey of creating this new thing. And the sun sign, the sun in you in the solar system that you are, represents the pattern through the zodiac. And that pattern has many sub-archetypes and sub-patterns that coordinates your fate to destiny journey. Now, it's not the only pattern in you. We got a moon. That's innately what you're kind of bringing to the table. But even then, that may not be accessible to your conscious mind because you might be in a culture that doesn't allow women to express an Aries moon. So now we get into lots of interesting territory that this isn't necessarily about. But I want to let you know that when you look at yourself as a solar system, we're going to go sun, destiny, patterns, moon, kind of what I'm bringing in, whether it's accessible really consciously or not, who knows. Then we go to Mercury, how I think, Venus, what I want, what my values are. And then, of course, Earth, the contract, the body, the biosphere, the creative matrix that you create all of this through. And then we go beyond Earth and we look out, and then there's Mars. And it's an appropriate place for Mars because if you think about you are Earth, in a sense, beyond Mars is Jupiter, Saturn, and I could go out further. For now, I'm just going to leave it there. And your connection to the outer world, Jupiter and Saturn represent society on one level, society, social structure, law, order, organized beliefs. And once we go past Mars, now we must have something in us to engage the outer world. That's my point. And that something is your Mars. If you didn't have a Mars, you wouldn't have enough energy, motivation, will to power to do anything. You got to have a Mars. We all do. So when Mars goes retrograde, a general theme always in the retrograde for Mars is this for everybody. Hey, who owns your Mars? Who gives you permission to access the masculine side of your psyche? Or not? Do you own your own Mars? Do you own your own will? Who owns your will? If we're going to say you have free will, okay, let's break that down. If I went through you intuitively and started looking at all the things that inform how you decide anything in your life, I'd have to look at, okay, how does your family factor in? How does your religious beliefs factor in? How do your spiritual beliefs factor in? How do your ideas of some supreme being, God, or co-creative law factor in here? And then I'm going to have to go to, okay, what about the country you live in? Democratic? Is it democratic? Do we got a democratic country where women are treated as equal and all people have equality and rights? Or do we have something else? Or do we have a dictatorship? What is this? And by the time I'm done, there'll be very little, if any, free will left. Because each of us is influenced by what's out there. Not only what's out there, what we've inherited as psychic DNA from our family lines. Now, pause button. I'm not saying we don't have some orb of free will. I'm making a point that you understand what Mars is. It is your capacity to be in your own self-agency, to take action, to make a decision, to say something, to be direct, to fight the good fight, which is the fight you have to fight, because if you don't, you'll disconnect from yourself. That's the good fight. The fight that demands you fight on behalf of mystical truth, holism, your own holism. A lot of us get spellcast into the false rebellions or the false fights, really, so that we don't fight the real one. Because if we did, we'd free up more of our will and we would own more of our capacity as individuals to, I'm assuming you do want to do this, create a kinder, more inclusive, more equal, more loving world. So each of us in our journey with Mars, on one hand, at some stage or stages of life, will confront, hey, who owns my Mars and how was my Mars wounded? How was my capacity to take action, be confident in myself, and feel a sense of courage wounded? Belief in self, confidence, how was that somehow wounded, thwarted, restrained? Now, in a shame-based culture, we've all been restrained this way in some orb or other. And you might have an area of your life where you could be the most courageous and creative and adventurous person, and in another area where you go cower in a corner. All of that becomes a Mars issue/challenge. So I want you to think for yourself through the retrograde overall, because this is the main kind of baseline guidance. What in me is not connected to Mars? Who can collapse my Mars? Who can throw me out a connection to my Mars, or what? And do I have beliefs about Mars that immediately position it as a negative force? So if I were to say to you, hey, how do you feel about aggression? Would you say it's always bad? And if you said, yeah, I think I hear the word aggression, aggressive, and I just kind of cringe, and it doesn't, I'd have to say, Robert, yeah, I have a belief that that's negative. And I would say, okay, great. Now, what about healthy aggression, healthy assertion, healthy self-assertion? It might free up a little bit more space to go, when could aggression or self-assertion be healthy? Well, I'll tell you when you set down a boundary. When you fight off a violator. I think aggression is great, healthy, affirming of your life and your own holism. How about when you are in the midst of being confronted by a bully? Would aggression serve you then? It depends on how you're out. I mean, these are just riffs around to get, because this is shadow work, to get you into a little bit of your Mars. So when you go out in the world and have to interact and assert yourself, how's that go? Where does it not go so well? Can you even leave the house? Can you even leave that front door? And be direct and really If Venus is what you want, what you value, what you find beautiful, what you want to fight for, can you go fight for it? And you might say, no, I'm a people pleaser. I'd be like, okay, everyone that you people please owns your Mars. I'm an overgiver. Okay, everyone you overgive to, they own your Mars. What do they own? They own how you act and put energy out in your life. And where your energy, your chi, your masculine assertive principle of how you create in the world, where that goes. One way to look at it is, yeah, some people may actually own that, so to speak. It's just one way to look at it. I'm not saying it's literal. I'm giving you some way to get into you and go, ooh, I feel something's true about that for me. Now, hold that thought or thoughts. We're going to keep moving on here and going a bit deeper. Are you getting what Mars is as a force in you? We all have to have a Mars. Mars is your personal will. And when I was younger, I got involved in the martial arts. I studied Taekwondo, got a black belt, very traditional dojang back in the 80s. I mean, Cobra Kai, baby. We're talking the Karate Kid type of school where we meditated. We learned ethics, integrity, Korean. So and I'll tell you, that said, my first, I think, conscious connection to my own Mars came through that. In my school, we didn't learn how to fight so we could go beat people up. Rather, we learned how to fight to defend our holism and to know that if a fight came for us, well, we had tools to hopefully not fight at all. We had a code of, de-escalation that we had to engage before we fought. And then if we had to fight, well, we could take care of business. So the martial arts, the arts of Mars. I want to offer you an opportunity, just at least for while you're with me now, to hang out shame-free, shadow-free in your Mars. Let me say it this way. You get to be a badass bitch, or whatever it is for you. You get to have some kind of assertive, masculine badassery here. And the truth is we all need that. And it's not about being assertive in a way that violates others. No, that is not what I'm saying. It's rather, I can't create what I was born to create in this world without having some way of taking action and having a personal will and being direct and going for what I want. Yes, in ways that honor others' holism, totally. We're not about violating people here. But if we're in a shadow Mars, we might be, yeah. This is about, no, I'm not pulling off destiny without a Mars. Destiny's an active process. It's a verb. So you're going to need a Mars for that. Now, Mars self-empowerment. What does that mean? Because we want to talk about self-empowerment tonight. We want to look at what does it mean to empower oneself in a Mars way? Well, I've kind of been hinting about it already. One, come to know your Mars. And be honest about the shape it's in. Robert, my Mars is about 20 feet down in my shadow. And I got all these archetypal matches around me, acting that out in the magnetics I've got going on here. Oh, yeah. And the shadow dancing I do on the internet daily. Oh, and am I triggered all the time? Totally. That's what happens when a Mars is in the unconscious in the shadow. I'm highly triggerable. Can I get my needs met? Not really, but if I'm passive aggressive, sometimes. You know what I mean? So, and if that applies to you, what I just said, give yourself a big hug. Give your Mars a big hug. I'm not offering anything to get right or wrong. We're speaking through the laws of the human psyche, the anatomy of the human psyche, and also we're going to look at the karmic anatomy of this Mars cycle. But there's nothing to get right or wrong here. There's just being more in conscious holism with ourselves in life and more in our power. So self-empowerment with Mars is, I have a will. I can assert myself in healthy ways. I can tell someone directly what my needs are. Now, they get permission to meet or not meet those needs, as does everybody, and as do you with other people. But whether they're capable or willing or, lack of capacity to meet my needs or join me in my Mars and what I need to do with my Mars, well, that's just information. Now I get other choices then to make. Do I want to stay in a relationship with this person? Do I seek out and ask other people that maybe will jive with my Mars directives and sense of agenda or not? Now, Mars is a force in the human ego, but it's also a force in your soul contract. It's a force in your psyche. Now, it's not just personal, though. This is collective. So think of it this way real quick. My country, the United States, 1, it has its own birth chart. 2, it has a Mars. Japan has a Mars. Finland has a Mars. Russia has a Mars. China has a Mars. North Korea has a Mars. Italy has a Mars. Okay, let's go a little micro. Your political party has a Mars. Your state, your town, your church. It's really interesting when we start to look across the board with curiosity and go, they all do have a Mars, don't they? They all take action. There's a group coming together to take action, make decisions, communicate, do things. Okay. Now I've got you in the Mars that expands beyond just you into collective, co-creative dynamics and karma. And I will tell you that perhaps, I'm not saying this is law, but think about it, feel it. Perhaps there's no other planet that generates karma as much as Mars does. What generates karma for all of us? Mostly it's our actions. Now, actions are, what we just do, right? But it's also what we say. Now we're heading to Gemini. It's how it's the words we use. It's the things we write, the things we communicate in any way we communicate, whether that's speaking, whether that's me doing this. There's a Mars in here. So identifying your empowerment with your Mars comes down to a conscious relationship with your own Mars and how you, through that, relate to the Marses out there. Now we're in some very dynamic territory. And this is what the Mars retrograde in Gemini is all about. It's about 2 things. 1, yes, your relationship to your own Mars, what you're doing with your Mars, or not doing with your Mars. But also, how are you absorbing karma from group energy, collective energy, social energy, when it comes to all the groups, all the tribes out there that have a Mars? And you're going to hear me start to say this, and I say it a lot to my students all the time. There's karma for that. So how you relate through your Mars to the greater Mars and things that are moving out there, well, there's karma for that. Now, in my country, speaking of Mars, if we didn't have a civil war, which was about slavery and the equality of African Americans and their liberation from slavery, if we didn't have a reckoning of the United States Mars by figuring out, are we going to be a country with a Mars that subjugates others and their Mars through slavery or not? Well, clearly, that was partly answered because we still have vestiges of that in racism and in inequality in the United States of America. And that's not just for African Americans, it's for Asians, it's for LGBTQ people. Women, it's for women. So this is where it gets very interesting to think of Mars. do we let greater authority and its Mars tell us what we're going to do? When is that in the interest of the holism of the society, and when isn't it? We entered into this question with COVID and vaccines, and many people had different points of view, polarized points of view. Now, thread from there into the karma in the room now, and the polarization of our society now. A polarization that exists in many arenas, many, not just one. Now I'm headed to Gemini. So let's get into Gemini for a minute. What is Gemini as an archetype, as a force of destiny, as a force of human development? Well, I kind of already told you that one. So we look to Gemini through the archetypal motif of the twins. Now, let's go in there. Well, what are the twins? They are represented in duality. There's usually male-female twin, ugly-pretty twin, and then we go into any duality in there. Then we go in the good and evil twin. Okay, so duality. What's duality? It's when you have things that exist in an opposite spectrum of the other. Black, white, yin, yang, opposites, either or. Now, I'm going to spin off of that deeper into the archetype of Gemini. It is about all those things. Now, if I were to say just for now, each sun sign, each archetype in its development as a sun sign of destiny, a force of destiny, offers gifts, offers growth. And some of what the light of Gemini is about, because you could hear all that talk of duality and infer darkness, and some of that's accurate. We're going to talk about that. But there's also light. So for example, between, let's say, black and white, what else is there? Well, there's a whole rainbow, right? So part of the Gemini's gifts is, hey, I'm going to show you black and white so you learn about the rainbow. Now, the connection in here with Gemini, which is in astrology connected to the planet and archetype of Mercury, the mind, is learning. The student archetype, it's the mind itself, how our human mind works. Think about when you were younger, learning your language, your mother language. Some of us speak multiple languages like me, and others in Europe and other places. And yet, there's always going to be one's mother language, which mine is English. Aber ich kann Deutsch sprechen und je parle français aussi. So, I've got, yo puedo hablar español también, un poquito, pero yo deseo más aprender. Yo necesito persona para practicar. ¿Deseas practicar conmigo? Por favor. Anyway. And that's all language is Gemini. It's how we give things names and come to understand what they are. And when we were younger, Geminian development was when we developed our languages and our ways of seeing and thinking. Our thinking patterns fall into the archetype of Gemini. And then within it, in its light, Gemini is about curiosity. It's about, I wonder what that is. Now, Sagittarius would go, I wonder what that means. Gemini just wants to know, what is that? Oh, it's a bug. Okay, cool. And tell me more about this bug. Is it a seasonal bug? Does it live all year? It's this curious need and voracious need. It's the student archetype. I want to keep learning. That's the light of it. And yet, there is a very dark side within the Gemini archetype that does, yes, deal with polarization, either or. And so, true to the title of this social live, what do we do when dualism goes dark? Now, take a step back, and I know I have a worldwide audience, and some of what I say next may seem to be a bit American-centric, because it kind of is, but that's purposeful in a way. Yet you have to extrapolate from, and I can't cover every country and nuance here, but extrapolate to yourself, your own life, your own country, your own society, some of the things I'm going to share with you as guidance. Because what Mars retrograde and every retrograde does is it says, okay, we've got to go into the shadow and understand how your society, your tribes, your country, yes, your political parties are working with this energy of, in this case, Gemini, in shadow ways, because this is a retrograde. So, of course, then we go, well, where are we as a society in black or white thinking? Fundamentalist thinking, that's called. It's either or. You're either Democrat or Republican. Really? Can't you be neither? So, and then in that, you could even go extreme far right and extreme far left. And now we're in polarization and extremes. Shadow side of Gemini. Absolutely. Now remember, this cycle is about the karma of that somehow beginning to manifest in events. And we have an eclipse on our election day here in the US, on our very election day. So, yeah, what does that mean? Well, it means all this stuff that I'm talking about is finding an event point or finding a awakening point. Now, I'm going to show the eclipse chart later, go into it a bit for you. But I want to give you, this is how you get your empowerment in it as well. You start to see archetypally. You start to see, and this is one of the things I loved that astrology gave me and taught me. And this is how I became, I think, a very clear intuitive, was it taught me neutralize. We all have bias. I have bias. I'm not saying I don't. But I also know I have this switch in me that can flip. And I just see what is as a karmic technician. And yeah, I can bring that back to bias and then, go from there. Or I can stay in the karmic technical territory the best I can and teach you how to do the same. Because why? Well, that's where we're going to have optimal choices. And we will not then be in the rough and tumble of dark karma. Because we've decided I'm going to look at karma through the lens of cause and effect, and as a teacher, and as a technical cause and effect creative force of life. It doesn't favor anybody or not favor anybody. It just doesn't work that way. Now, you got issues with that? Well, that's fine. Go watch my thing on karma. But hang with me anyway and see where you feel. You find yourself in some of the things I'm about to talk about. So, in Gemini, yeah, we're looking at the shadow side of the human mind. The human mind has been trained to, we've been trained to think in either or. So when I see people going after each other online in political bullying and tribalism, toxic tribalism, it's always assumed that someone with a different point of view than you is the other side. No one ever takes a minute to go, wait a minute, you might not be a Democrat or Republican, you might just be an independent, thinking for yourself with a point of view. And you know that that's not where a lot of these people are because of the language they use. It's shadow language. What's shadow language? Well, when you're calling someone names, when you're putting them down, you're making them wrong versus expressing a point of view, you're in your shadow. And I'm not making that right or wrong. I'm being technical. And I will tell you, that kind of discourse, if you can even call it that, well, there's karma for that. There's karma for the weaponization of words at other people. And that is, yes, part of this retrograde cycle. Words are a Gemini, fall under the umbrella of Gemini as an archetype. What are the power of words? Now, an interesting aside that occurred right as Mars was getting ready to go retrograde, speaking of words and weaponization of words, Elon Musk buys Twitter. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I am no fan of that platform. It's the most toxic, nasty platform I think that exists. in the social arena of what we see that isn't like dark webbish. You know, you all know, spend 1 minute, 2 minutes on there and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. We do not have compassionate discourse. There's a very void of kindness, and it's all about name calling and my side versus your side, and this is what's true, and you're crazy, and you know, all the things that go on there. So what's the karma for that? Now if we go to words, then we can pull in some other things here that are part of this retrograde cycle and say, well, all right, this is Mars. It's what we do with words, Gemini. It's what we do with communication, Gemini. It's what we do with how we speak, how we engage, deliver, and proliferate information or misinformation. These are Mars themes. This is how we network. This is how we also then tribe up. So I want you to get an image now of life as a whole, right? And here we are as human beings in this experiment of co-creation with whatever free will we can actually free up. And we make these soul agreements to be here. And in the soul agreements, your angels are saying, okay, you're going to go down to Earth and learn about free will and how what you say, do, and what you choose affects everything in some way. In other words, everything has karma. And that's neutral. It's a neutral teacher. It's just there to say, hey, okay, this is the effect of hate. This is the effect of love. This is the effect of hate speech. This is the effect of speaking truth to power. This is the effect of a rebellion. This is the effect of a revolution. This is the effect of complacency. This is the effect of voting. This is the effect of not voting. Neutral. But the effects don't feel neutral, do they? And that's what the teacher is. So, yeah, I felt pretty shitty. So maybe I want to do something different next time or this time. If I'm a bully and I'm bullying people through hate speech or through political, tribal, toxic speech or whatever it is, I'm actually not connecting to my own holism in that any more than I am the person I'm harming. When I was a kid and stood up to bullies on the playground that sniffed out I was gay, you know, I initially was standing up for me, but then something in me larger than me motivated me to stand up for other people too, which was crazy because I was getting the shit kicked out of me for standing up for me already. And now I'm putting myself, you know, out there to stand up for someone else. And I took a pause recently and I thought, why did I do that? What in me came online that would stand up to bullies, even though I was the one also getting bullied? And what I realized it was my connection to holism. You bullying that person's like bullying me. And then I got bigger, so I could stand up to them. So why we fight the good fight. And in polarity, this is what's often really true. Each extreme side believes they're right, that they have the truth, that they know better than the other side. And then that somehow vindicates or validates the aggression or harm they bring. Now, it's one thing to get into, let's say, World War II, because there is a dictator deciding who gets to live or die based on religion or sexuality or whatever else got someone into a concentration camp. That's one thing. And it's another to say, I've got to go fight that because that is an abomination of holism. That does not honor everyone's right to life, regardless of all these elements. So it gets really interesting because there's a lot of slipperiness within this, where one can say, because my side's right, well, what makes your side right? And then the next thing to acknowledge is, if I were to say to you, listen, what's reality? Define reality for me. Likely each of us would have some definition possibly of our reality. Well, from my eyes, this is what's happening in the world. From my eyes, this is what's happening in my life. From my eyes, okay. Now I'm going to ask you something, and to carry this with through the rest of whatever I say. Are you hearing and seeing me through your internalized dualism and polarization? Has that already started to happen? Have you already started to hear anything I'm saying through whatever in you begins to pull reality and separate it out into polarity? I'm not making this right or wrong. We all do this to some degree. I'm hopefully making it conscious. So a while back, I said vaccines. Where'd that go in you? Highly triggerable territory. There's a lot of polarization still is around this. Where did it go in you? Now, if you happen to be someone who's anti-vax, you might have went there, right? Or pro-vax went there. And that would be polarized. And then as your Geminian guide, I'd say, is there ever a time where vaccines would be absolutely essential to the whole wellness and holism of the populace? Now, if you're polarized anti-vax, you wouldn't be able to maybe say, yeah, I could see a time. And I'm not making that right or wrong. I'm not making you wrong. I'm helping you understand your system. And where else does your system do that? To what other reality? Now, a lot of people will get into, in that regard, drug companies and all the things I've heard from that extreme side. And then there's the other extreme side. And I've always been a fan of the middle, because that's where intuition thrives. That's where clear perception thrives. In extremes, conspiracy thrive. Now, can you see, just through that alone, very triggerable thing, how this rolls? How this rolls. And what this Mars retrograde as a shadow process is going to bring up in us and in our societies, countries, and cultures. It's that phenomena. It's not, let me be clear, it's not a debate on vaccines it's going to bring up per se. It's how we polarize through whatever is in front of us into either or. I will just say that the both and, which is also Geminian, which is also what births a curiosity, is the key to clear intuition. Hands down. Because there can be some circumstances where the medicine is one side, and other circumstances where the medicine for the moment or that person or life or the situation is the other side. You can't know that if you have a polarized black or white mind, a fundamentalist mind. And fundamentalism isn't just exclusive to religion. It's everywhere. It's in all sorts of other things, from veganism to spirituality to to astrology. It goes everywhere. And we have to be very aware. There's karma for that. So, this is where we get into the dynamic nature of reality and truth. Now, let me come back to reality for a minute as a topic. What is reality? What is the metric that we could use if we could say there is an objective reality? And there's also obviously subjective reality. But is there really an objective reality that exists that each of us could relate to? And how would we know it was real? Isn't that a good question? Because our subjective realities are in us. We're looking out through them daily. And so then what's the greater grid of reality And how do we relate to that? And this is all part of this Mars retrograde in Gemini. You just got to hang out for a minute. Because what reality is, yes, in many ways, it's how I see the world through things like perhaps my trauma. I see the world through my experiences that have happened to me. I see the world through shame. I see the world now, watch this, through the archetypes in me that manage my shame. I see myself through that too. So if I have a perfectionist archetype, well, I see the world as flawed because that's what the perfectionist sees. Everything's flawed. I got to fix it. And you know what? I see me that way. I'm going to see you that way. So subjective. Now objective. There's levels to this I can't get into, but for the purposes of this retrograde, let me offer this. The main metric of reality would be holism. So I'm always evaluating the holism when I was doing full-time readings, the holism of a client, the holism of their questions. And here's the thing about holism. None of us see the whole. It's impossible. The whole meaning all of existence, all of life, the universe, the other dimensions, none of us see it all. We just don't. We don't have to either, by the way. That's not the goal here. The goal is understanding how to clearly see what we need to so that we can make this, yes, a kinder, more connected, more compassionate, forgiving, loving world. You got to ask yourself, in all that's going on in this world right now, do you want to do that? What would you, quote unquote, sacrifice in you to do that? Would you sacrifice your polarization? Would you sacrifice your duality, your fundamentalist thinking? Would you? Do you even know what those are in you? Do you know the actions you take out of that? And this Mars retrograde says you don't. I got to show you where you're taking actions that actually are bound in shadow dualism, either or thinking, polarization, and not based in love and holism. Mystical territory here. So hang with that thought. The metric of reality is holism. So let me just use Earth School, where we are, this classroom, real quick, to demonstrate that. Now, in the mind, we get to be programmed by society, culture, our family, our spirituality, our whatever we begin to establish as beliefs. We get to be programmed in such a way that we take the programming, the archetypes of it, and see through them, and then feel like, okay, that's reality, done deal. Not to say some of that might be accurate, might not be accurate, might be accurate. Depends. But my point is this. What if you believed in something, but the holism of life was clearly karmically showing you it wasn't true? So if I'm a fundamentalist Christian and I believe God created the world in 7 days, but yet we find dinosaur bones that our carbon dating lets us know are millions of years old. Now what? Do we ignore and push out that reality in favor of our God? He, in 7 days, created the world. What's the karma for doing that? How does that same phenomena occur when it comes to other areas of our lives? So if I decided I'm not going to believe in a law of physics and certain dynamics here on planet Earth, how about the law called gravity? I'm just not going to believe in it. A little inconvenient. Well, I'm going to say, well, you might want to check that out, because if we didn't believe in that law, we would never have learned how to fly. When we understood the law, then we could understand how to bring certain propulsion and wings and all that a plane became to get off the ground. And wow, now we can get in a plane, go across an ocean, go to another continent. But without reality, the objective reality where gravity is a law, we wouldn't have gotten there. Once again, take that same dynamic and now look at your own life with curiosity regarding what's really real and true. Now, currently my country is struggling with this, that we had an election in 2020 in which there was very little voter fraud, but yet someone's saying that it was all fraud, but there's no real proof. And it's used to polarize instead of exist in the truth and integrity of a democracy. What's the karma for that? Well, we're going to find out. We're finding out. And this is what I mean when I say astrology is what we live. This, and I'll be honest, this particular Mars retrograde in Gemini is absolutely political. The synchronicities of it, the eclipse on election day in the US, and the ripple effects of that, and the events around election day, and those ripple effects, they are absolutely going to flow right into everybody worldwide, not just the United States. Because we are the democracy everyone has looked up to as a standard of democracy for the most part. And then now we enter into so many arenas here. The weaponization of words, polarized, toxic political tribalism, a break from reality and holism. And there's just karma for that. It's that simple. So when we look at what's going on in the greater grid and the karmic anatomy of our times, well, wouldn't you agree that part of that karmic anatomy is living in a very, very polarized, tribal, toxically tribal world, where it's you versus another, or the other versus you. In all arenas, many arenas, not just political, which is obvious. Now that begs the question then, what keeps our polarization alive? Where did it come from? And whom does it serve? While we're fighting each other, calling each other names, from each sides of various political aisles or belief spectrums or whatever polarity we are in, there is a greater thing happening. And that greater thing is power grabs, yes, the collapse of a democracy. And while we fight each other, the other dark agendas go on unchecked. Go fight that person over there. They're the enemy. Go call them libtard, something, or far-right freak, whatever. And where's holism? Where's our love rebel? Where's our love? Where's our conscious choice? Where's our looking around at, well, that politician's got me hating the other side so that I don't look at what they're doing. And usually what they're doing isn't for me, it's for whoever owns them. Something to think about. Any politician you vote for, any employee you hire, anyone in your life that does something for you or is elected to do something for you, et cetera, or hired to do something for you, they are acting as an agent of your Mars. You have just given them your Mars. And I'm going to tell you, there's karma for that. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it certainly could be self-sabotaging, self-disconnecting, and harmful for other people, or maybe it's healing. But there's karma nonetheless. So what keeps our polarization alive? Who wants it to stay alive? To raise money, to grift money, really. This is what I'm after here. looking at this with eyes that say, look, if I took a step out of my either or, I'm right, you're wrong. If I took a step out of that, what would I see? What would I see about you and your humanity? What would I see about me and my humanity? What new choices of compassion and action might come out of this? And let's just say, if we were going back to, yes, World War II, and I was asking you the same questions in that era, if we took a step back out of polarization and looked at Hitler with holism, what would you see? Well, what I would see, just see how this feels for you, is I would see a man that needed to be stopped by all means necessary. And anyone that was acting under his Mars needed to be stopped as well. And if that meant war, then that's the medicine for that moment. I'm not in either or. Is war something we would want? No. Is it always wrong or bad? I don't know if that's true. I don't know if there's an either or there. Was it wrong or bad to fight Hitler and go to war? I think it was the medicine for that moment. Is it the medicine all the time? No. God, no. Hopefully peace is. Hopefully equality is. But in shadow dualism, this is what can happen. In either or, this is where things can go. Now, this brings into full view the growing pains of our journey with the internet, the growing pains in our journey with the way that we see through polarized eyes, through either or, the growing journey of thinking extremes are useful. They're usually not. And thinking that we can say whatever without consequence, that's never true. I'll tell you what, as a gay man, words like faggot, true story. I used to live in Boulder, Colorado. I was once taking my mountain bike down to this trailhead to go for a mountain bike ride. As I was getting my mountain bike out of my car, I could hear these two guys joking back and forth, calling each other faggots. And once I realized the energy of the conversation, the fact that they were not apparently gay, I said, guys, what's up with the F word? The love rebel in me called him out. Hey, man, we weren't even talking to you. And I said, well, as a gay man that could hear you, I find that offensive. And I don't think you should ever say that word. So they went quiet. I got on my bike, shaking with rage, Mars, in this mystical triggering. And one of them came up to me and said, we really weren't talking to you. And, we were just kidding around. I said, you know what? There's just some things that aren't funny. I looked at him in the eyes. I summoned his soul. And I said, do you know what? There's kids in high school that kill themselves over that word. I used to be one of them. And he tried to shake my hand and somehow redeem himself out of what he now could karmically see was a real bad move, real disconnecting one. And I said, I'm not shaking your hand. Rather, you know what I want from you? Never, ever use that word again. Ever. I said, can you do that for me? And he's like, yeah, I guess. And so when we look at things like when women are treated a certain way, or when minorities are treated a certain way, and we look at the power of words, the weaponization of words, it seems very convenient now to act as if election lies don't matter, or calling people names doesn't matter. And it does matter. It always matters. And when you step back to the impact of what we all say or do, this is a Gemini theme. This is Mars and Gemini shadow alchemy time. Part of your, let's say, retrograde homework is to look at the world, your life, your groups, your tribes. How is language used? What's the intentionality of it? Do you find yourself in polarization being against in some vehement way? Now, let me offer the love rebel archetype here. This is something I've been teaching on the past few years. I think it is the archetype of our times, at least one of them. And it is an absolutely countercultural force, meaning it doesn't occur to most of us that I could, as a gay man, I'll just use myself, love you from this mystical point of view, even though you are bullying me or someone else or using homophobic slurs. And I could stand up to you and bring my Mars to that, draw my sword, if you will, and prepare to fight. And all of that's from love. Because you're violating my holism and equality, the holism and equality of everyone in my community, and you're also violating your own. Because in your holism, you're enough. And you can call me names or put me on whatever extreme polarity of the other and the enemy that you want. You still have the same value as me, and I have the same value as you. That is a mystical truth. It's called soul esteem. And what's also true is I will fight the good fight, because if I hadn't said something to those guys that had just were putting their mountain bikes away and I was getting mine out, if I hadn't said something, I would have disconnected from me. I would have not been able to look at myself in the mirror, as they say. There was something fundamental in my soul that would have ached. And did I put myself at risk for confrontation and maybe a fight? Yeah, I did, but it was that or the coward archetype, and I wasn't going for the coward. Now, in balance to this, check this out. That both and. Does that mean I would always confront someone for using homophobic slurs? No. If I was in some redneck bar down in Mississippi with the Confederate flags hanging on the wall, and I heard all those words going around that bar, I'm not going to get up on the table and tell them the truth about what they're doing. I'm going to leave and not fight that fight. And I'm not going to feel disconnected from myself, because nothing would come out of that. Nothing would positively shift out of that for those people. They're in their whole tribe. It's me in a tribe. Those guys, my intuition, my soul knew would shift after I said what I said. And I really felt they did. And I bet they never use that word again. There's times where we have to fight that good fight and times when we have to say, this isn't my fight. How do you know? You're not going to know with a fundamentalist, formulaic, perfectionist, it's always this way mind. You're going to know from your intuitive sense and the holism of that moment and what's the medicine in that moment that's going to be most useful. If I'm at some redneck bar down in Mississippi, the medicine of that moment is my survival and getting out of there. And I'm good with that. So these themes are pointing us toward the bigger things in society and culture that we're all experiencing. You can't turn on any news source anymore, and this is my next thread, without there being some call to get toxically fearful. So whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, pick a news source. And I'm not saying there aren't any out there that might be holistic and informative without the spin and duality involved. But what I really realized is that two things I want you to consider. when we look at what feeds polarization, usually it's fear, right? What feeds polarization against gay men, lesbians, LGBTQ people is usually fear. I've experienced that in my own life. They're afraid. Now, what are they afraid of? Who knows? Could be they're gay too, and they're afraid that that's, let me beat you up and scapegoat you because I can't look at me and I know that this is true about me and I don't know what to do with it. Or it's just I'm running on my tribe's Mars. We're a fundamentalist Christian Baptist church. You're going to hell. And you don't have value in the eyes of God like I do. And until you convert to heterosexuality, you won't. Okay. Maybe that's the driver. Doesn't matter. But fear, and I want to be very clear. Toxic fear. There's healthy fear. So let's take a thread from spirituality and self-help that goes around. Choose love over fear. Never, ever have I been a fan of that slogan. I'm just not, because it's dualistic. It positions love as if it has an opposite, and mystical love has no opposite. That kind of polarity doesn't exist in the mystical sort of holism of it all. Fear is part of God, even toxic fear. However, when it comes to co-creative action and choice, toxic fear is propelled by this sort of program from culture that you're under threat. And this is how. It's them. They're the ones threatening you. Why? Well, because they're Jewish, because they're gay, because they're African American, because they're Asian, because they're a woman. Okay. Now, that toxic fear propels polarization. This Mars retrograde is about a confrontation with our shadow dynamics with this. And let me say it another way, a karmic event-based consequence with our shadow dynamics with a media, an internet platform, and platforms that thrive on an economy of fear. Now, I want you to think about what fear does in your brain, your nervous system. Fear itself, and this could also be healthy fear, by the way. So I'm bringing them all into the room here, can cause your nervous system to fight Mars. This is a Mars issue. To take flight, also Mars. Or to become paralyzed and do nothing, that's also Mars. And my point is, fear is, in this regard, often polarizing. So if I keep you in a state of fear, if you wonder why you feel so exhausted, one thread may be this. You're in an economy, an internet-based and media economy that thrives in looks, views, clicks, likes that are all about making you afraid. And then with that comes a lot of neurochemical action in your system. Adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol. And then what we become, though we're not aware, are fear addicts. I think in the last 6 years, this is a thing now. It's become a big thing. Inside of what's also a dopamine economy. And that's where we, get on the line to get the likes and the clicks for that dopamine hit. This is a companion to that. Such that I suspect, I can't prove this, but feel it out and see what you think or feel, that fear now is also about dopamine. Not just the other neurochemical things that bring us into polarized states. So now we've got politics, we've got political, I don't even think I can call them leaders, let's just say elected officials, that they grift on this fear. It's a grift. They're after you, so give us money so we can fight them, the radical left or right. Now, in all of that, I'm going to offer, because I'm about ready to vote tomorrow, that doesn't mean we don't get engaged, we don't vote, we don't have discourse and dialogue respectfully with each other around political issues or differences. I think we do that, although I don't really think that exists now, sadly. But what we do is we look at the optimal options in this moment, not perfect. Bring perfectionist politics in. As we've already seen, there's karma for that. Rather, who's the optimal one? Who sits the most within a sense of care and holism for their constituents, the holism of our democracy, and the holism of your needs and everyone else's needs. And then you go vote on the optimal, not perfect candidate. You know, there's never going to be a perfect candidate, right? But I want to call you forward to look at what's ahead here from this lens, because as we come into next week's eclipse, I do feel there's events in it, and I'm going to pull up the chart to explain some of this, that are the expression of every single thing I've just said up until now. All of it. We live in times that are absolutely challenging and also so consequential. And I know you may be feeling like, Robert, I just can't anymore. I totally get it. Trust, I do. And you may be feeling like, I don't know. It's their fault. It's that side. Here's the thing, really. Just check this out. Maybe there's some truth in there. I'll both and with you there a little. Each side's got something that they're doing, let's say, wrong. But each side's also got something that they're doing right. One of my good friends once said to me, if you can't find something that the other side's doing that you can say is right, and something that your side's doing that you can say is wrong, you're not thinking for yourself. Your political tribe is. Now, that said, I'm a registered unaffiliated here in Colorado. That is also otherwise known as independent, for this very reason. Because I want to always be looking at the optimal candidate for a moment. I have voted Republican a few times. I do mostly vote Democrat because they've always had the gays and the LGBTQ communities back. There's been no Republican that I've seen ever have our back, ever. So that's where I come into my self-connection and go, well, wait a minute. Tax breaks and economy and all that kind of stuff don't matter if I get fired for being gay. Let's make sure we got the holistic priorities straight here as we vote. Here's what I'm after here, though, ultimately. And this is for everyone in the world. Like I said, this is very American-centric because it's playing out so acutely here and within the astrology dates so poignantly. But this Mars retrograde, let's look at the stats, shall we? I haven't brought those up for you yet. Let's look at this. And so take everything I said, hold on to that for a sec. We're going to come into some stats of this cycle. Now, the reason I said to kind of consider what was going on in your life around September 3rd is because that's when the retrograde setup began. And this is what we call the setup for the shadow retrograde zone. Why do I say shadow retrograde zone? Well, on September 3rd, Mars hit 8 degrees Gemini, and then it goes all the way up to, I'm rounding up here, to 26 degrees Gemini, October 30th, where it stations retrograde, and it begins to head back toward 8 degrees Gemini, where it'll station direct, and that happens on January 12th. That's the whole zone, those degrees. Now, if you look at that sort of magenta ruler with the degrees there, that's the archetypal band in which this is playing out. And sidebar, if you have any mutable signs of astrology, which would be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces in your chart with planets or anything on the angles that's emphasized, this is a big retrograde for you. So I'll just leave that there for those that even know what that means. But for all of us, this archetypal band of consciousness, of co-creation, of the shadow of us, our culture, is what's activated. So that's why it's called the shadow retrograde zone. It's where we're going to, if I could pull out your psyche, my psyche, the psyche of the world, everyone's tribal psyches, and look to the section of consciousness in all of us and go, okay, here's where it's going down. And that's part of the story because there's other planets going on. I'm not going to get into those, but that are part of the story as well. This is the focus, though, when it comes to Mars. Now, in every retrograde, there's a midpoint. When it comes to Mars, because it's outside of Earth's orbit, that midpoint is defined by the sun opposing Mars. This time, it'll be at 16 degrees Gemini, and that happens on December 7th. I'll tie up some dates for you. Look at the eclipse, bring that back full around again. But when we get to January 12th, we're back at 8 degrees Gemini. Mars will station to go direct, and then the integration phase from January 12th to March 15th begins. That's the time where everything from January 12th to March 15th that we've been tasked to become conscious of as individuals and as collectives, that's where we have to then take our awareness and make changes, reform, all under the umbrella of Mars. So let me just hypothesize some situation scenarios here that I think are connected to this upcoming lunar eclipse. Let's just say what we're looking at here is karmic buildup in the psyche of life because words have been weaponized. Lies have been believed as truth. Reality has been distorted. If I start to have a conversation with you about whether, and this is literally kind of how it goes sometimes, whether racism is about being racist. Are we going to have that discussion? Are we literally going to actually talk and have a, and the fact is we are. People can say racist things and then say they're not racist. Okay. Yeah, well, only racists say that. So, yeah. But we have, just like that, things now in media that are spun and spelled, and people can say stuff on camera, as recently just happened with someone running for Arizona, Carrie Lake, and then turn around and say, I didn't say that, when we can just see you saying it on camera. And that was something that went on with Donald Trump. I mean, this thing, the thing is, there's karma for that. Where do you think that karma goes? Well, we got a dose of it January 6th in my country, but that didn't neutralize anything. So the karma is still building. And where does it go? Well, we're in the territory of Mars here. It goes to, usually, historically, violence, and social unrest, and harm. You can't. This is the lesson, I think, partly of this cycle. You can't just say anything without a consequence. You know, even if there weren't some social, legal consequence or political consequence, there's still your angels watching you. And your own karma building, and them watching that and going, you are not in your spirit, in your soul. You are disconnecting to a dark space. You're becoming dark. You're becoming someone that needs to take power from people to feel powerful. And that's amping up in what you say, what you do, how you think, and yes, how you vote. you're becoming dark. Now, that's not to judge someone's worthiness. We all have worth. End of story. But it is karmic. And it is to judge as a positive judgment, meaning truth. This is karmic truth. The judge archetype's about, I've got to look at the balance of karmic truth and adjudicate a rebalance for an imbalance. But mystical truth says this, okay, if you go and disempower someone else because you're connected to everybody, you just disempowered you. If you're a bully that violates someone else, well, you just, divorced yourself from a connection to holism. And when people get divorced from a connection of holism, they then become dark, vampiric. And I call it becoming a dark grid of power, a dark grid of power. So I've got to take power, it's like the Death Star in Star Wars, from others to get power and energy to me, because I'm not plugged into the holism of life, and therefore I don't have access to the power of the holism of life. And this brings up something that I hope offers you hope. Holism always wins, if you will. Winning meaning it will always come out on top, because dark grids, they're not sustainable. They eventually run out of things to vampirize, and the holism of life is bigger than them because it's the all. So when we talk about, hey, the universe has your back, that's a lot of fluff and nothing to me, unless you understand what I just said. The holism of the universe, yeah, that has your back. Why? Because if you're in alignment with it, which means you're in alignment with everyone having equality, you're in alignment with everyone having value, you're in alignment with everybody having a right to be here, regardless of ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, status, throw in any other difference, everyone has a right, meaning everyone's part of the whole of existence. And when we're in alignment with that, my prayer goes to the whole grid. If I'm on a dark grid, well, my prayer just stays on that grid. It doesn't go out to the light grid. In fact, that prayer usually is about drawing energy from something or controlling, or, and that brings up, why does someone want to control your Mars? Why do they want it? They want you under control. What do they use? Oftentimes it's fear. What does fear do? Polarizes you. When you're polarized, what happens? You're reactive. You're not in conscious choice, and you're often really not in your heart at all. So this cycle is connected to these elements. Now I'm going to bring in the thread about the collective nature of this and the spiritual nature of this, the mystical nature of it, really. Mars will, through its retrograde, square Neptune 3 times. Now, for those of you who aren't savvy in astrology, I'm not going to go to the astrological language for this. For those of you who are savvy in astrology, just take what I'm saying and explore the square. But what this is about, it's about a conversation between Mars as a creative force in the universe, in you and me, and Neptune as a creative force in you and me. Neptune is about holism, all is one, and most definitely at this more emotional, oceanic level of life, where exists all creative mysteries, all creative possibilities. But also on a shadow side, if we approach it from wounded ego territory, now we start to activate the delusory side of Neptune, which it puts us in fantasy, puts us in concepts of reality that are not really holistically real. But Mars is coming up and saying, okay, we got to talk. We got to have a chat. And Neptune's like, okay. Now in a square, it's not about Neptune winning or Mars winning. It's about a new archetypal creative solution that does not come from the level of the conflict. Let me say this in terms of our lives. What is happening in the polarization of our world? The solutions do not lie at the level of the conflict, do not lie at the level of the polarization. So if I were to say to you, yeah, I'll tell you, I can jive with the universe having your back when we talk about holism, but I'll also tell you this, polarization never has your back. Absolutely not. It's on a limited grid. Its power supply is about taking power from people. Eventually, that's going to get toppled by the greater whole. It's just how it historically has always gone. It might take a long time. There might be a lot of suffering and damage done until that happens. Totally true. So we find ourselves in this creative moment where we're being programmed by society, triggered through a fear economy, a dopamine economy, a polarization economy, to get real radical on a side. And I'm not saying, if I were to apply this to voting, that we don't take some measure to look at candidates and go, who's the most holistic here? They're in truth, they're in reality, they're honoring democracy, they are not calling the other side names, and they're not raising money on fear and hate. Okay, so who am I going to vote for? Hopefully the person that's doing that the least, because that's all you got. Sit it out. We'll usually get the greater of the evils, but this is where we have to kind of go, wait a minute. In this moment in my life, how do I make choices that are optimal, not perfect, within the karmic realities of life's grid? What are those karmic realities? Are you looking at them? Are you exploring them neutrally? Are you actually naming them? Because if you don't, you can't take connected, holistic action. You'll take action based on wishful thinking, fantasy, tribalism, and that's what this retrograde is saying. Go into the shadow side of your polarized Geminian ways of seeing the world so that you can come out of that and now understand karmically optimal choices. So there's so much in here. Now, what I'm talking about, and there's a reason why I titled this this live this way, is what do we need now in our time, beyond just this cycle, but just generally speaking, to be empowered? Have you thought of that question? One of my best friends and colleagues, Carolyn Mace, and I had a chat about this some months ago. And I said, Carolyn, here's the thing. We're in a time where we need to redefine what empowerment is. Empowerment is a verb. What you need for your empowerment today, think about this, is probably very different from what you needed 20 years ago. Maybe a year ago. Maybe 5 months ago. I don't know. But my point is, what we need for empowerment changes, and most certainly in context to the archetypal challenges of our time. I'm talking about one archetypal challenge here. So as Carolyn and I had that conversation, it inspired us to teach a workshop together. And that is the sponsor for this Friday Social Life. Now, the workshop is sold out. It's next weekend in Santa Fe. But my dear friends, as sponsor of this Social Life, you can come and watch it as a live stream. Come on. Yes, there's a live streaming event with me and Carolyn. You can watch it. It's on sale right now at a great discount right on mace.com. We're going to be talking and teaching you, both of us, co-teaching. Many of you have wanted this forever. And you, of course, get access to on-demand recordings, etc. You'll have to look at mace.com for more information. They're producing this, but I really want to encourage you. There's a link in the description. Go check it out. and look at all the different dynamics and things we're going to be teaching, talking about, with me and Carolyn on the scene, it's going to be something. I cannot tell you how excited I am to teach with her over this weekend. And that is the sponsor of the Social Live and connects a lot to everything I've said. Now, I'm not going to be speaking through the astrology per se. I'm going to be speaking through archetypes and other angles, but you can be sure it will be really kind of an extension of sorts with more information and more dynamics to consider off of what we just have been doing tonight. So please check that out. Link is in the video description. Now, so as you may know, we're in eclipse season, and that means we have got a set of eclipses. Now, eclipses always come in pairs, and they are aligned to the nodal axis of the moon, which are about points of the moon's orbit in relationship to the Earth and the sun. And what happens in any eclipse, one or two things. The moon is coming in front of the sun's light and eclipsing it, and then the Earth is seeing the sun go dark. That's a new moon solar eclipse. And then oftentimes that's only visible on certain parts of, in certain parts of the world. Then there's the full moon lunar eclipse, and that's when the sun is shining. Here's the sun. I need to get like planetary props here. And then here's Earth. And then let's say here's the moon. And then the Earth, kind of in alignment with the sun, there's full moon, comes into this plane where it blocks the light, interrupts, notice that word, the light of the sun, and then eclipses the moon. The moon kind of goes dark. So you've either got the sun going dark in a new moon solar eclipse or the moon going dark in a full moon lunar eclipse. That's the kind of, let's say, astronomy of eclipses, meaning the technical reasons why these phenomena occur. What's the archetypal and symbolic and astrological significance of these things? Well, it's this. And because eclipses come in pairs, there'll be a new moon solar eclipse, and that was followed by, as is coming up on the 8th of November, a full moon lunar eclipse. It means that there's something about both that is part of what's happening, part of the energies, part of the events, part of the shifts and everything that we're going through. So what I want to look at next, just to kind of wind this down, a lot of these themes, and put it on a timeline for you, and also ground the information through a few more insights and angles, is we're going to look at the stats again real quick of this retrograde cycle for Mars in Gemini, and then we're going to go right into the eclipses, and then that'll be a wrap. So let's remember the Mars retrograde in Gemini stats, meaning this is the exact dates of the retrograde, setup phase, station direct, midpoint, etc. Mars stationed retrograde just days ago on October 30th at 26 degrees Gemini. And all that may have come up from the 3rd of September till now is going to be part of your shadow retrograde process. Now, Mars went into Gemini on August 20th. So it's already been in Gemini before the hit that 8 degrees retrograde zone, just so you're aware. That September 3rd isn't when it went into Gemini, it's when it hit 8 degrees Gemini. Now, we're already in the retrograde. This lasts roughly 2 months. And then there's a midpoint on December 3rd, and that's when Mars comes into an oppositional alignment with the sun. And then Mars will station direct January 12th at 8 degrees Gemini, where it's began its setup phase, and set up shadow retrograde zone. And then the integration phase goes from January 12th to March 15th, 2023 at 26 degrees Gemini. That's when all that we've been through, all that we've experienced, all the wake-up calls, all the, stuff we've been dealing with through the retrograde itself has to now find a new recalibration. So from the 12th of January to March 15th, we gotta redo some stuff. We got to redo the way we work with our Mars through Gemini. So what does that look like? Well, I think it looks a lot like maybe we stop the weaponization of words a little bit. Maybe we stop the extreme polarity and polarizations and letting others fearmonger us into polarity so they own our Mars, own our vote, own our will. Maybe we stop empowering people that demonstrate hate as a way to gain footing in fundraising or politics and hate speech. Maybe, these are just riffing around. We find a different way forward where it's both and, where we have to regroup and reform. And I think this will happen really in this cycle at a very cultural and collective level. Now, I made this very American-centric, but I would definitely keep an eye on other areas of the world, most notably what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. I think that's part of this story in other ways. And, we've got Brazil going through something right now. We've got Argentina, Venezuela. We've got Taiwan and China in a very similar thing going on in here. If we went to the geopolitical sort of stage, wow. And I oftentimes will reference those things because they're obvious. And then you can then find ways to come into you through them into your own particular journey with this process. Now, speaking of that which is obvious, let's start to look at the eclipses. I'm going to go to the full moon lunar eclipse that's ahead, coming up here on Tuesday, November 8th. This is the chart for it. It's in Taurus. And what this says to me, it says a lot, and we're kind of way over on time, so I don't want to get too much into it, but this is about looking at this new thing in this eclipse. What are eclipses? As I said, they're interruptions of a usual pattern. In the same way, the Earth is going to interrupt the flow of light from the sun to the moon, which is a full moon, because it's going to come between that band of light that usually goes from the sun to the moon and lumines the full moon. Something in us, in our cultures and our societies, and the sun is in Scorpio with Mercury, the South Node, and Venus in Scorpio right there, all in this oppositional relationship with Uranus right on the moon and also the North Node. Now, there's more going on in this chart. We've still got Uranus square with Saturn. That's a big deal. And what's really a T-square within this eclipse. So that's going to definitely much matter. But what I want to do to condense and save time is condense and, bring this all down to what this really could be about, what I feel it will be about. As I said earlier, conflict. Squares are about conflict. Oppositions can be as well. It doesn't resolve at the level in which it's created, especially archetypal levels of conflict. We have to go to a more holistic, if you will, higher ground and find solutions of both and versus either or. And so let's look at it this way with the Saturn T-square in there. Let's just say Saturn is the conservative archetype, which is traditionally very true. Uranus is a progressive. And they're having a conflicting discussion. But I'm going to throw in, because of the Mars retrograde, this is the shadow conservative and the shadow progressive. Both believing their reality is the reality, their solutions are the solutions, without considering the middle or the rest of us that maybe aren't in extreme identities this way. And it's about coming to some sort of middle place where we look at optimal, holistic, in this moment, necessary steps. Why? Because this eclipse says there's something that interrupts the normal business as usual, right versus left, right around our election day. Something interrupts that, especially with Uranus in there. Something unexpected, but also something, it's like the Tower cards, like lightning hitting a outmoded, outdated structure. And in this case, I'm going to say the structure itself is polarization. It is not sustainable. The weaponization of words is not sustainable. That will generate karmic momentum and go somewhere. And it does, yes, turn typically and historically to violence. So, and I'm not really saying anything that we don't know, because it's already in the room. It's already in the room. So there's karma for this. And what we learn from this karma is what I feel the rest of the Mars retrograde becomes more about. There's other lunations I'm not going to get into, but there's other lunations that show a ripple effect of this next week. And what the United States, and those of us just as individuals on planet Earth really begin to do with the shadow of dualism. Now, one might be enticed to double down in the dualism as if their extreme side is right and the other is wrong. That's the whole problem. When we are busy calling each other left or right, we're forgetting the system wants it that way. You think you're fighting the system? No, you're not. It's exactly what the system counts on. Stay polarized. I own your will. I own your money now because I can grift off of this. And now go symbolic. Well, I'm grifting your energy, your focus, your heart, your capacity to feel compassion, kindness, speak with compassion and kindness. And yeah, maybe have a love rebellion, but it's a love rebellion, not a hate rebellion. That's here. That's in this eclipse. It is so loaded. I don't know if I've seen something this loaded, maybe ever. And just the other alignments that come with these astrological moments. Now, to better understand the eclipse that's coming up, you do have to go back to the new moon eclipse that we had just roughly around 2 weeks ago. So let's go look at that real quick. So this is all part of the Mars retrograde, by the way, because this was still part of the setup phase. Even though Mars had not gone retrograde yet on October 25th, when this happened, we did have this new moon eclipse in Scorpio. And now, where we had the Earth interrupting the frequency and pattern that was going from the sun to the moon in Taurus, the sun in Scorpio to the moon in Taurus, this time in this eclipse, we had the moon coming in front of the sun at 2 degrees exactly. Scorpio, which I think is very interesting. And then you got, Venus there also in Scorpio. And then you look to all the other things going on. Once again, this real, even tighter square between Saturn and Uranus and the dialogue they've been having for 2 years. Jupiter, just 2 days later, goes back into Pisces on the 27th. This is something I taught my membership. This is something I want to share with you a little thread of. This year has been a year about learning the difference between the human heart and the cosmic heart. When Jupiter conjuncted Neptune in the beginning of the year, I did in my membership a whole thing on the cosmic heart. Now, the cosmic heart is not really, honestly, in most of our vocabulary. And that's not to make any of us right or wrong. It's just that we mostly see through our human journey, not the soul and its eyes, in which the cosmic heart abides. And the human heart is loving in as much as it can be, and it is human, so it's vulnerable, messy, but it also can be vengeful and jealous and spiteful. So it's got all the emotional territory being human in it. And in it, we can, with the human heart, sort of feel like, wow, this is right, this is wrong. Now, let's jump up to cosmic heart. In the cosmic heart, there is no right or wrong. There's truth, there's learning. There's karma, sure, but as a teacher, not as a punishment. There's holism, and now I got to go paradox on you, because that's what happens in mystical territory. We go to paradox. Even the dark grids of polarization and its archetypes are part of holism, because there's nothing that's not part of holism. So in the cosmic heart, we can see dark figures, dark leaders, not as horrible, awful people, but rather wounded and perhaps, lacking in worth people I mean, when you like yourself and feel good about you, you don't got to go call other people names or take their power or make fun of them. You know, someone who's really in their power, their worth, and their sense of value doesn't do that because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel an alignment to soul esteem. It doesn't feel an alignment to holism to go do that. Now we can identify behavior and identify karma and address that accordingly. I'm not saying we don't do that, but there's a difference between doing that and calling someone a libtard or some right-wing shadow thing. So, yeah, I just read a great article that really spoke about if you want to be taken seriously, speak like an adult. So name calling. Once we're in that arena, we're in polarization, we're in the shadow. Once we are weaponizing words that way, once we're calling things names and polar ways that are meant and engineered to polarize, they have think tanks for political ads that sit around and try to figure out how to best do this. So the cosmic heart is like, no, we don't do that here. We learn, we grow, we love. And we forgive, we accept. All is one here. So it's this way of seeing that I sense is so necessary now. Now let me go to Ukraine. Understanding something like war and its karmic effects. And we're not really being shown here a lot of what's really going on there as far as the death. I did see a documentary. There are some really great outlets and documentaries out there that really do begin to speak directly and truthfully about events without political spin or slant or bias for the most part. And they were interviewing these soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, about what they've been through. One had lost his leg and he was talking about things, and you could clearly see this man was so traumatized. I was bawling my eyes out watching his friend get his head blown off with just his jaw left. I mean, this is real. You want reality, there's some reality. That's the reality of war. And it's just as devastating for the Russian soldiers that have died in great numbers. These are people. These are human beings. These are families. These are on both sides. And where are you at with that? Now, as I ask that question, I'm toggling you between human and cosmic heart. And that's where you start to feel the difference in you. My cosmic heart can look at the Russians and weep just as strongly and feel as much sadness as I can the Ukrainians. Because this is just horrible, period. And my cosmic heart can also see that the Ukrainians are connected to a real holistic Mars in this fight, because this is their country. It was invaded without cause or provocation. And also see the Russian side of it. But in the end, what honors holism? If we're going to live in some sort of ideal of democracy and for a country to have its own agency and self-direction. And so it gets realer for us, right? When we have to look at that and then go, yeah, but for them to have this war means we pay more for gas, or we pay more for energy, or we don't get energy at all if you're in Europe, maybe. These are realities as well. And these are pressure points, if you will, of the soul that then summon what's true. And I can't answer that for everybody. And we have to answer that for ourselves to some degree, but would we be willing to pay more for energy so that a nation could have its democracy and remain intact? Or do we just believe in democracy when it's convenient and doesn't cost us anything? and it gets more complex than that, and I acknowledge that. But this is what I'm saying, like, these are the things in the room. And in the end, it's not that anything's quote unquote right or wrong. There is karma for everything. How do we feel about that? What kind of world? Where are our co-creative options here? Now, another thing to consider with Mars, having said that, are you more motivated by love or hate? Your finances or love? What would you give up for a greater ideal? What wouldn't you? This is how you come to know your real drivers, is when it's harder and less convenient to make the choice that supports holism versus the choice that supports you paying your rent. And maybe it's both and. I mean, that's the thing. This is where we have to find our truths, is in the exploration of the uncomfortable shadow side of our times. And here we are. There will be karma for all choices. There will be karma for all social movements or lack thereof. There will be karma for, claiming an election was stolen when it was not. It's just how it goes. There'll be karma for us doing something or doing nothing about anything. And those are all, in a sense, Mars related. So where does this go? Where are we? Well, I don't feel the story, the co-creative story ahead, is completely set in stone. I think a lot of the karma that's ahead in the next few weeks is. It's baked in, it's too late. Its momentum's too strong. It's what we do with that karma that determines the next story. And we'll see what we do. My hope is that I've given you enough to consider for yourself to make the most holistic and soulful of choices and actions, to come to know your own Mars better and to move in the world with it and realize your Mars matters. And if you're not moving consciously with your Mars in a direct relationship with it, someone's probably got it. Or something. Near as I can tell, it seems to be the truth for most people. None of us are opted out of hard choices in this life. In fact, that's what we sign up for. And if we really want to know what we really ultimately, when all is said and done, value, versus what we say we value or philosophize we value or like to think we value, it comes through dark nights. And this Mars retrograde in Gemini, in a sense, is a dark night. It's a dark night of your Mars, my Mars, but our collective Mars. The karmic momentum that's been put in motion, that's martial within the archetype of Gemini, and most notably Gemini's shadow. Polarization, weaponization of words, hate speech, divisiveness. Duality is not good or bad. But there's shadow duality, shadow polarization that has karma. And it's usually disconnecting and can lead to, and has led to, some of the greatest atrocities we've ever had happen on this planet. So my hope is to give you your Mars, a little connection to back to your Mars, and for you to see beyond your own internal polarization a little bit more, to look at both and options. And sense where you are called to participate with your Mars within the Gemini facets of this life. So to me, my best suggestion is curiosity is wonderful. Staying in a space of not knowing it all really activates curiosity. Always being curious about others, even though sometimes they do things that you're like, what? maintaining some foot in the cosmic heart, just one foot. We got to be in the human level of it all. But can we stay in the both and? All of us deserve, because we are inherently worthy, kindness, connection, respect, love, space to be here, space to have our feelings and our voices and our stories heard. It's when we think we have to take someone else's story away to tell our story, or tell them what their story should be to tell our story, or now we're in some different territory. And interesting times. I look at this from a meta view of growing pains of becoming one world, what the internet has brought online because of that process, and the continued journey of that in the context of resources of Earth. I could throw in a lot of other things here that are part of our growing pains, like climate change and other things that polarize us into not seeing a shared truth or reality. Imagine if we just some of us decided, well, I'm sorry, gravity doesn't work for me. Weather patterns don't work for me. Losing elections don't work for me. So, when we start to move toward, in my country, a place where only one party is willing to lose, well, there's karma for that. Well, thanks for joining me for this Friday Social Live. I will be back in a couple weeks with a new one. In the meantime, don't forget my sponsor is this event that I will be at with Carolyn Mace. I hope that you'll join us. That will be going on next weekend. It's a live streaming event of a workshop we'll be co-teaching down in Santa Fe called Self-Empowerment for the Archetypal Challenges of Our Time. Go to mace.com, get yourself signed up. It's on a discount right now. It's really nice. It's certainly a great discount compared to what people are paying that are coming there live, to be honest with you. And you'll be able to watch it on demand, and I believe there is post-production for that. That will be available with both video on demand and audio download. Don't quote me. You'll have to ask mace.com. But we're going to be covering, very similar to this live, a lot of powerful topics that I think you're going to find of great help getting a compass of self-empowerment during these times. We're going to be addressing the self-empowerment that we need, you need now. 2022, with all that's going on. So I do hope you'll join me and Carolyn there. It's going to be quite an event, I have a feeling. I will see you in a few weeks, a couple weeks, with the next Friday Social Live, or I'll see you next weekend as we stream live from Santa Fe. Namaste.